Hello everyone again, it's Mitch. I'm going to talk about the second time I was shot at in country, and oddly enough it was the very next day. So the first time was the 2nd of October 2010, and the second time was the 3rd of October. So we're still working out of Ghazni, and we're still with the 101st Airborne, and we got a urgent mission to a place called Ajristan, which was probably the furthest we would travel within a medevac mission. It was probably, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour one way. So we were well beyond the golden hour going to this location. But the guys had told us they had been out there before, quite a few mountain ranges in between us and them. Can't remember the exact altitude, but we were crossing ridge lines about 12.5. We did not have supplemental oxygen in our aircraft, so Army regulations said that we had to, but they didn't give us any, so we had to go anyway. So we're going over there. Like I said, it was quite a long flight to get there, crossing all of these high mountains, and all of a sudden we come to a wide open area, this massive valley that looks like the salt flats here in the US, just vast open nothing. And there's this tiny little fire base just right on the edge of this pretty substantial village, not a city, but just a pretty large village. And the base was so small that we couldn't actually land inside its boundary, so we had to land on the outside, which is a little sketchy to begin with. So we get on the ground. Unfortunately, it's taking much longer than we're comfortable with, but obviously we just keep waiting. They were American casualties, and we loaded the patients on board, and we started to take off. I remember I was flying right seat that day, and the crew chief sits right behind the right seat, and all of a sudden I felt this big pressure change, this drop, and first thing I said was, "What did you drop back there? Did you drop a toolbox?" And the crew chief's response was, "No, there was a mortar or something just hit the LZ just as we left." And he said it was like a Hollywood movie where he actually saw somebody flying through the air. And of course my initial thought was, wonderful, we're going to come back here. And this was a joint base too, so there was Polish, American, and Afghan National Army. So the whole time we're headed back, I'm expecting another radio call for us to turn around and go back, but it never came. So I don't know what actually happened, if anybody was killed or whatever. However, we were not called back, so that was pretty scary. Initially, with the realizing that they were targeting us in the LZ, and luckily they were just about 10 seconds too late, and they launched rockets, mortars, whatever it was that hit, but there was several large explosions after we just took off, so that was pretty sketchy. And not even a week or so later, we got a mission. I was working out of Shank at the time to a place called Carwhile. It was a U.S. soldier head injury, IED blast, I believe, on the highway. So at the time we had guidance with head injuries to try to remain as low to the ground as possible because the altitude, pressure on the brain, whatever. So as I said, initially that's what we were told to stay as low as we possibly could once we picked up the patients. And Carwhile was just to the west of Shank, just over the ridgeline, not too far away from the mission where we lost the 2 U.S. soldiers that I talked about in my first video. So we went out there and we picked up this patient, and I was flying left seat that day. I had a lieutenant that was flying with me in the right seat. He was on the controls on our way back, and going kind of cutting through the ravines and the fingers of the hills, and just out of the corner of my right eye I saw a puff of smoke, again, I took the controls and did a negative G turn to the left, and then continued down in altitude to the right, closer to the ground, and then I started to climb back out. And then same thing. We see this guy sitting there, right on the edge of the ridge, just with a RPG fired. And the funny part of this story is, when I did the negative G drop, when I dropped the collective, my poor medic in the back was working over the patient with nothing but a monkey harness on, which is basically like a chest strap that he's hooked into a hook or either in the ceiling or the floor. And with negative Gs, you tend to lose gravity. So he was floating over the patient, which at the time for him it was not very funny, but afterwards we laughed about it. And still to this day, when we connect, we talk to each other, that comes up quite frequently, the time that I made the medic float in the air. But again, I had to go back and do a debrief, and just that whole area was just full of bad guys, and they were gunning for me. This was the third time within like 2.5 weeks that I was shot at, and if I remember correctly, at this point I was like one of the only ones that had been shot at least that we knew. And the hilarious part is a lot of the guys that were on board the aircraft, other crew members, they were put in for combat action badges, and strangely enough, I was the very last one to receive the combat action badge, pretty much I think in the deployment. And I do believe I was shot at quite a few more times, and I'll talk about those in my other videos, but just wanted to make a short video about that. I look back on it now and it's quite funny, if you can believe that. But